Welcome to Marketing Demystified, the podcast that connects the dots for business leaders to drive revenue through effective marketing strategy. We chat with marketing experts on different topics that will help you ramp up your revenue. We stream live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, and you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platforms. Marketing Demystified, the podcast, is presented to you by GrowGetter, your partner in growth marketing. And here's today's episode.
Hello, everyone. Are you ready to be inspired, informed, and empowered with actionable tips to transform your marketing game? You are in the right place. Welcome to Marketing Demystified. I'm your host, Jenn Mancusi, CEO and co-founder of GrowGetter, your growth marketing partner. Today, we're going to talk about why traditional marketing campaigns and strategies are too slow for today's market and how agile marketing can help you move faster and respond to change in real time. To help us navigate this topic, I'm joined by Greg Kihlström, creator of the Agile Brand methodology and ICP Agile Certified Coach. Greg has guided Fortune 500 companies through agile marketing transformations, and he's here to demystify how to operationalize agile marketing in your organization. Very excited to have this conversation today. Welcome to the show, Greg.
Hey, thanks for having me. Looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I think this is such an interesting topic and concept, and I'm really excited to dive into it with you. Yeah, let's get going.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Before we get into, talking about agile marketing, what is fundamentally broken about traditional campaign planning and marketing today?
Yeah, I think things just move too quickly to plan out an entire year, let alone, a quarter in advance to the degree that marketing used to be done. Marketing traditionally was very precise as far as, we're going to spend this amount of dollars this week and running on these channels and doing these activities. That's great from a planning and definitely appeals to the operational part and the process oriented part of me. But what we all know is that the world changes too quickly to be able to do that. And so it doesn't mean that we throw out our goals or our overall objectives and KPIs, but it does mean that we build in room to be able to change and adapt and understand that the world is evolving and we're going to need to adapt, whether that's, the economy, supply chain issues, something like COVID happening, like all of these things have kind of taught us that we can only plan so much so far in advance.
So true. And you really do have to allow for flexibility in your planning. We've gone over the years from a 12-month editorial calendar down to maybe a 6-month or maybe a 3.5-month editorial calendar, because exactly what you're saying, you just don't know how things are going to change. And one challenge I actually see come up quite often is companies do plan out their 12-month strategy, or not, I shouldn't say strategy. They plan their 12-month tactics. And when something new comes up or something shifts in the market, it gets added on top because the other things are already in the plan. And then that creates a lot of confusion and noise, and you're doing too much. And actually, I think it sort of works the opposite in terms of effectiveness, right? Where it just creates this energy of we're kind of throwing whatever out into the market with no cohesive plan. It sort of counteracts the plan to begin with.
Yeah, I think so. And yeah, I mean, when everything's a priority, nothing's a priority, right? So it's that whole idea of there's only so much. It's good to be able to target different audience segments if you have multiple segments, but you also have to be realistic about what your internal teams can do, as well as what the market really wants. I mean, maybe, sometimes less is more, and, better content or better marketing activities in general, but fewer can sometimes be much more effective. So and then again, to build in the flexibility to say that, okay, well, we may know what products and services we're going to offer pretty far out, but we don't know how they're going to be received, and we don't know what our competitors are going to do but so far out. So we need to build in that flexibility to be able to change without, to your other point, without just tacking more stuff on and just creating more work without more returns.
Right, exactly. So talk to me about what agile marketing means. What does that term mean? What's the concept? What does it like actually mean in practice? And I guess like, how is it different from just being flexible or being reactive?
Yeah, definitely. And I think the first, I would say, misconception that I run into is what you just said, which is people say, "Oh, you're agile, you're just kind of reactive, and whatever happened yesterday, we're gonna change everything or change too quickly or things like that." And so to me, I look at agile as it's almost like using the scientific method to say, okay, we're going to run an experiment. We're going to run something long enough to get important data to understand if something's working or not, but we're not going to run it so long that we already know this and we should have done something different in the meantime. So that's why often, so agile comes from originally from the software development world. Even before that, it has origins in the world of manufacturing and stuff like that. But proper agile, you could say, really grew up in the software development world, where anybody familiar with this, they're working in maybe 2 or 3 week sprints where they'll take on a series of tasks, do that, iterate, take a look back at the end of those 2 or 3 weeks and say, okay, did we achieve what we needed to? What comes next? What's the priority? A lot of marketers hear that and are like, well, but we know we need to keep selling this widget all year long, no matter what happens. So why would we do that? Well, again, for not only the reasons already discussed, but campaigns, no matter how well we prepare, no matter how great the creative is and how much we spend, are not always as effective as we wish they were. And so being iterative without being reactive is the way to be successful. So in other words, iterating is saying, okay, we're going to run this, we're going to have statistically significant results within 2 weeks. If we run it for 2 days and don't get them, then that's not enough. We're not going to learn enough. But we're going to run it for 2 weeks, and at the end of that 2 weeks, we need to be flexible enough to be able to say this is not working at all, and therefore, major course correction, or maybe this is working, but we need to do some minor course corrections. And to me, that's agile, is building in what is success from the beginning, and how long are we going to take to determine success, and then are we willing to make the necessary changes once it succeeds or fails.
So I love the last thing you just said about what does success look like from the beginning. This is my favorite topic of all time. Because I think, this is where marketing fails, is when people don't agree on what success looks like for a particular campaign. But especially if you're talking about this agile method and this iterative method of being able to make decisions quickly and be flexible. If you've got 5 people in a room and everybody has a different idea of what good is or what working means, then that's never going to work. Like, that's step 1 of like agreeing on what success looks like is so critical to marketing in general, but especially an approach like this.
Yeah, completely agree. So the term I love that comes out of the agile world, and specifically, I mean, I can talk agile terminology all day, but just a high level, Scrum is something that it's a flavor of agile, you could say, that has its own own rituals and things like that. There's a concept called definition of done, and seems so simple on its surface, but to your point, get 5 people in a room to say, okay, this is what done looks like. And in the marketing example, done is generally speaking going to involve a metric of of success or something. But even if you're building a landing page for a new product or something, what is done? And what is version 1 of done? And again, get 5 people to get the same answer. And first of all, I'd be shocked if you do that the first time. But once you get used to this process, it becomes the first thing that you do. And sounds like you agree.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think everything else falls down if you haven't defined it. And I love that, like, going back to, the Scrum definition, the definition of done. because how do we know when we're done with this project, right? How do we know that we've gotten to a point where we want to make a decision? And I think that links in directly with the biggest question I get, like, how long should we run this test for? And the answer is always, it depends. There is not, I mean, I want to hear actually what you think, but for what I've seen is that it depends on the company that you're in. It depends on what your definition of done is, and it depends on your audience. If you're a B2C business and you're running ads on Instagram that have an audience of millions, then what is working for those ads is going to be very different from a highly targeted niche account-based marketing program on LinkedIn to a very specific, B2B buyer, right? Anyways, like, I'm curious how you think about, like, how long to run these experiments, and, is it time-based? Is it volume-based? What works for you?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, it completely depends. I mean, in addition to the podcast, I work as a consultant, and so I'm working with a Fortune 100 right now, and their advertising campaigns are significantly more than another Fortune 1000 that I'm working with smaller budgets and more local, regional based and stuff. So that's actually part of the equation. No, this isn't easy for anyone. I would say there are marketers that are more statistically inclined, and so you can have an early on conversation about statistical significance, and their eyes don't glaze over, and they have an idea of what that is, but there's still some other stakeholder there that's like, no, we're gonna do it this way. So again, that's why definition of done is important. But also, I think it is important to understand you need to have some guidelines. I think you need to have a few different ways of looking at what done looks like. I would say sometimes it is time-based, because you're just not going to get the volume, in an advertising campaign, for instance, you're not going to get the volume you need until it reaches a certain amount of time, or there could be other measures that you're using of reach and impressions and stuff like that, depending on how you're measuring that. And also, just how sophisticated your measurements and tools may be to, figure out significance and stuff. But I would say, don't figure that out after the fact, figure that out from the start, because a good test is really, and a good experiment is always, success is defined at the upfront. The hypothesis of the test is always defined before you start, because things always look a little different halfway through an experiment than they did at the very beginning. So we tend to be influenced and biased by what we see early on. And so it's not really fair to the test. I know that might sound funny, but it's not really fair to the test to, be biased a quarter of the way through. So, defining those things up front just keeps everybody from being kind of influenced and biased by what happens.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So again, it's like half of the work is done before you've done any work. It's just making some really critical decisions so that the experiment can be effective, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
So talk to me about the process. Like, what does an iterative marketing process look like compared to traditional campaign execution?
Yeah, so I think, starting with what's similar is, again, you don't throw out goals, and you don't even throw out annual goals or annual, we're going to sell X amount of things, or we're going to increase whatever metric. Those things stay the same, but what does change is the frequency of things like planning and the depth sometimes of planning as well. So you'll have a strategy that probably carries you out through the year, but that strategy is revisited, maybe monthly, but at least quarterly, to make sure that, okay, are we still on track? What else is going on in the world, whether that's our competitors or, macroeconomic things at large. And then there are much shorter checkpoints in between of, I would recommend every couple weeks, Scrum would say, anywhere between 2 and 4 weeks is kind of the general intervals, and check in and make sure that things are progressing the way that they should. And you don't need to pivot, or changing doesn't mean necessarily dropping something. It may mean prioritizing one thing over the other, and that gives you the opportunity to be able to shift things. And if sales are doing great in one area but they're falling in another, it gives you the opportunity to shore up the resources in those, instead of what you said earlier, which is just pouring more on everything and burning everybody out, and probably having diminishing returns on some of those things that are already working well. So, it comes down to, like, in Scrum you call them sprints. So like doing a 2-week cadence of, at the beginning we determine here's what we're working on. We check in at several points throughout, and then at the end, I think one of the most critical things that people often overlook is having the retrospective, what it's called, which is taking a look back and figuring out not only what worked from a marketing perspective, but what worked about the way that we worked together, and let's improve all of that. Because it's one thing to achieve marketing results once, but it's another to have repeatable and dare I say, enjoyable processes to achieve those results moving forward.
I just said this to somebody. Somebody made a comment on a LinkedIn post yesterday, and I responded like, "If we're not having fun, we're probably doing it wrong, right?
Right.
Marketing should be fun." I totally agree with that, and I'm curious when you think about like the different things that can shift, right? I love like kind of maintaining those goals, right? This is what we need to achieve in order to be successful. How we do it can change along the way. What are some of the variables that you're looking at? Is it, about the specific tactic? Is it the channel? Is it the content or the topics, or, some combination of all of those things? Like, how are you thinking about those tests? And, what are the variables that you might shift along the way?
Yeah, I mean, it's gonna be. I mean, squishy answer here. Obviously it depends on the specific use cases, but we're essentially optimizing towards an outcome, and the outcome is determined by the strategy. And so that's what's nice about, and maybe comforting to those that are a little put off by this. Oh wow, this feels like everything changes every day and I don't know what I'm expecting. Well, no, you're still, if you're selling, beverages or whatever, you're still selling, bottles of whatever it is, and you're still optimizing for that. It's just how you do it and how consumers are responding to it, the external factors, whether that's competitors or supply chain or whatever the case may be. And so, I would say looking at performance as not only ROI on ad spend or marketing spend, but also ROI on internal efficiencies. And, are we able to improve the way that we're doing the work? And then, can we increase everything? Can we increase efficiency and, purchase or sales, whatever the case may be? That's that's the holy grail, right? But even doing one of those and keeping the other in line would be great. So, always looking at, I think that feedback loop of metrics is so critical. And that's where I think the more people that have access to be able to see those numbers, the better as well, because they may have some insights that one person on the team may look at it and see kind of in their area, but working more collaboratively to look at, how are we performing overall can be incredibly helpful. And that's one thing that I love about the Agile principles is, they really emphasize collaboration as well as trusting the team doing the work to know how to do it best. And, that's, I think some leaders have a hard time with that part of it, but the proof's in the pudding, and you kind of you trust the teams to do that, and then you check, you trust but verify, you could say, is you have those checkpoints to make sure that things really are working well or not.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what you're talking about, the importance of the internal processes being sort of just as important as the external effectiveness of the campaign, it is really interesting. So I'm curious to learn more about that. Like, how do you think about like these cross-functional marketing teams, and what does that do differently from having an individual marketing person or an agency? Like, what's the function of that cross-functional team?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as consumers become more and more omni-channel. I mean, even now, I don't know the latest stats, but consumers are definitely using multiple channels to make purchases, to do research, all of those things. And so to meet our consumers where they are, we need marketers that understand that. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have experts in social, and and even in search still, or other tactics. But it does mean that everybody needs to be able to talk with one another, needs to be able to share. And I think from a leadership perspective, I think there needs to be aligned goals and outcomes, not just we're going to get as many email opens and clicks as we possibly can at the expense of social media or some other channel. It means we're all working together for a shared goal as much as we can. You're always going to want to optimize your channels, but I think a lot of larger teams and larger orgs that I see where they kind of fall down a little bit is in these very siloed teams that are, they're blowing their numbers out of the water, but on their single channel, but yet customers aren't buying more, and overall lifetime value isn't any better. And so, getting those teams aligned and talking and again, aligning on what success looks like, I think is the first step there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. And, I have a very dear friend who at one point was leading customer experience at a major financial institution. And they were really struggling with, the customer experience in person versus the digital customer experience, which were two very different experiences that their customers are having. And like you said, the consumer is omni-channel. They're going to go in the bank and they're going to go on their app. They're going to go into the clothing store and try stuff on, or they're going to order it online, and they expect a consistent experience in those different channels. And then same with, social versus email, like that consistency is so important. I think it started to become a really big thing, especially during COVID when all of the in-person places shut down and people were forced online, and then the places reopened, and like that experience, it was so sort of critical to create that consistency. But a lot of, especially like the bigger, like larger organizations, really, that those silos were there, they were established. So it's hard to bring people together to create that consistency.
Yeah. And I mean, you hear anecdotally, you'll hear, there's a few companies where think like USAA and Zappos, they'll your first couple weeks at those organizations, you're on customer service, you're hearing from the customers themselves. And I think I heard the other day, someone very senior at Uber, like actually does drive, they'll drive people like a few hours a week or something like that, just to literally be in the shoes of of their customers, and in the case of Uber, their drivers. So I mean, not every company can afford to do that, or it might not even make sense to do it in that way. But man, to build some kind of empathy with what those customers are going through and just how they look at things, and to remember that, because I mean, we are all, if you're a retail company, we're all consumers. When we, in our after hours lives or whatever. So we should be able to empathize, and yet I think we get so just focused on the minutia of a tactic or something that sometimes we forget that, consumers are, our customers are, they're just people.
Yeah, that's true. And we too are people.
Right.
Us corporate people, we're also people, and
Right.
also consumers. And, there's something we could learn from our own experiences every once in a while.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you walk us through maybe an agile marketing transformation that you've helped coach a company through? What were they doing wrong when you started, and what were some of the steps you went through along the way to help them pivot to more of an agile approach?
Yeah, sure. So, I worked with a Fortune 500 retailer. Their e-commerce team was very much, they were doing a lot, and they were doing a lot quickly, but they were not agile. And so that's kind of the difference here, is that they were kind of in the, as you described earlier, things would just get thrown on them because they had a new product coming out, and they needed to launch it, but they couldn't drop anything else because everything was planned out. Everything was planned out, in my estimation, too far to be able to account for these things. So I started at the basics of really just, okay, some of the people were very familiar with Scrum and with Agile already, but many were not. And so we started with the basics of just like, okay, let's get everybody on the same page. Let's teach everybody the language that we're going to start speaking. And so, all those Scrum and Agile words, they sound just like buzzwords and jargon or whatever until you understand the meaning behind them. And then, what I do find though is that teaching everyone that common vocabulary, then all of a sudden nobody feels like they're sitting on the sidelines or, oh well, I didn't do this before, that person, they know everything, or nobody feels marginalized in that situation because everybody's able to speak those languages. And then we went through exercises. We did mock, I learned about their processes, and we did some mock like workshop type activities to run through. Okay, let's run through, what does a sprint look like from planning it initially and determining what goes in our, the backlog of items that need to get done in those 2 weeks. Let's go all the way through and just mock this up. And we spent a few days doing this so that everybody got a chance to play in essence every role. It was a relatively small team, but everybody got to play all of the roles that they needed to play, and then ask questions and talk about it as they're doing it, because we know when we get busy with stuff, we wish we had time to talk about the work about the work, but we rarely do. And so we got to talk about it as we were doing it, and then we had that retrospective, that look back at the 2 weeks at the end, and we're able to talk about, okay, well, this works, or this would work for us, but this other thing really wouldn't. And so, we got to talk very practically about that. And then, after that, they took the ball forward, and I worked with them collaboratively over a couple of months to just kind of check in and be a coach to them. But they really took it and ran with it. And then, last I heard, they've rolled it out to other parts of the organization. So a great iterative way to iterate and improve and all that stuff.
That's amazing. Iterate on the iterative process.
Right.
Yeah. I want to go back to what you were talking about, this, the concept of the shared vocabulary and the Agile vocabulary. That's so important, that being kind of a key step in like setting up these processes. Can you talk about what are some of the key terms that maybe people who are listening who aren't familiar with traditional Agile should know?
Yeah. And I will also couch it with, there are a lot of things that just, it's nice to know, but there's so much jargon. And, I've written a couple of books about this, and so again, I could talk somebody's ear off about this. But I think the concept of sprints is really important in terms of we're going to work on this for this amount of time, and when the sprint is over, we're going to take a look back and do that. So that time boxes the current amount of efforts. The idea of the backlog, which is, these are all the things that we would like to get done. They're not necessarily all the things that will get done, but the backlog is that list of like, here's our wish list. And we're going to determine at the beginning of every sprint, here are the things that we think should be done. And the as I was saying about, trusting the team to do the right thing, the team is part of that process. That's, the team that's doing the work is part of that process of figuring out what that backlog is. There's always they call it the Scrum Master, that is kind of the project manager over this, and ultimately will decide what gets prioritized, but the team is part of that as well. And then the retrospective that I've mentioned is just, I think the other key part, which is that time to look back and see not only, again, how did our marketing work perform, but how did we work together, and what would we do differently? What would we keep that worked well, but what would we also do differently in the next iteration? And it's not just a list that we put off on some SharePoint drive somewhere or something like that. It's stuff that gets implemented starting in the next sprint, which generally speaking starts the next day or something like that. And so, there's opportunity to really not only talk about the stuff, but put it into practice immediately, which I think also increases morale for people and teams that feel like, I keep coming up with these ideas, I keep sharing them with people, but they never get implemented. Well, here's a chance for that stuff to actually get done and put into practice in real time.
Yeah. And I think too, like the 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 retrospective and kind of understanding like what's working and actually be able to carry that through to future projects and campaigns and things like that is so critical, because for me, my experience, that data and those results are very unique to your business.
Yeah.
So I get questions a lot about benchmarks, about how does a LinkedIn ad campaign perform versus email. And I'm like, it's so different from every company because everyone has a different audience. You have a different message. You have a different platform or offering or whatever it might be. And, you know, I see it a lot of like early stage startups trying to copy what really well established businesses are doing in well established categories. And, why doesn't that work for me? So, everything that you're talking about here, this like very experimental and iterative mindset and actually testing and learning all the time is so critical, because you can't really rely on what works for other businesses. Your inputs, we did another episode about marketing inputs with Tracy Borenson a few weeks ago. And, your individual marketing inputs are going to determine the output. So this is kind of like the bookend to that, of like, this is how you actually experiment and test and learn. And it's so, so critical. So you can stop kind of looking at, not that you can't learn from other businesses and get ideas, and also see, are you outperforming or underperforming an industry standard? But I try not to focus too much on that stuff and focus the learning internally. I think it's so critical to do it the way you're describing.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of my mentors in Agile, I mean, he helped set up Agile sales and marketing at IBM, and so worked with some other very large organizations. And he said this, similar enough to me, which is, he's done Agile in 10 different organizations. Let's say it's never been exactly the same. I think what's important to know is you need to understand the rules so that you can apply them when and where and how they make sense to you. So again, understanding what a sprint is and what the roles and what a scrum master is and what the different roles on a team are, and all those things. It's really important to understand those. And there are learnings that you can take forward, but exactly to your point, it's never going to look the same. Just like marketing doesn't look the same from one organization to another. The way that Agile is done or the way that marketing is performed is never going to look exactly the same. And so having the flexibility, knowing the rules, so to speak, so okay, there's some wise things that others have learned and learned what not to do. I think learning what not to do is, I think, the most valuable thing. But but at the same time, even what didn't work at IBM might actually work specifically for your organization because of any number of factors. So yeah, definitely. I mean, I think being flexible, I would say be humble, be willing to admit that something didn't work, even if it was your idea, and just be open to, the best ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. And like what you were saying about like, oh, I had this idea and it sort of never gets implemented. Like, we have a concept here at GrowGetter of a worst possible idea, which is not unique to us. I think other companies adopt that as well. But if you are really data driven and really metrics driven, it opens the door for creativity, because you have a process where you can try stuff that you would never have tried before. I have worked in organizations where the answer has been, that's not how we do things here. And that is very limiting. Then you are not allowed to get creative, and you're not allowed to discover things that might really outperform the stuff you've always done. So I think having that very sort of, data driven and learning based org can really unlock creativity, because that person who had that idea for a long time, and there's no shortage of good ideas, they pop up all the time. You can test them quickly, fail fast, and move on from things that don't work. I also love hearing stories of like marketing teams or founders who are like, we hated this campaign that we were running, but we couldn't stop running it because everything else we tried wouldn't outperform it. Like, it takes away all the subjectivity of marketing and really makes it focus on the outcomes, which again, I think it just unlocks creativity and possibility.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, you touched on this as well, which is just enabling your teams to fail. I don't even think it's failing if you learn, if you learn from it, it's not failure. But traditionally, I mean, think about where we would be if experiments were never allowed to fail. Like, we wouldn't have any of the scientific things that we have right now. So, like, as a leader, your team, you're 100% of your experiments are not going to succeed. Let's just, like, it's statistically impossible. And so what are they going to do? They're going to do something besides succeed. Whatever you want to label that is fine, but the teams need to be able to feel comfortable, to what you're saying. They need to feel comfortable that whatever the outcomes are, at the very least, we know what not to do next time. And that's valuable. Like, I don't know what I would do without knowing what not to do in my own life.
Totally, totally. And also maybe retest that later in a
Right,
different
right.
environment, right? If you can understand why something didn't work, then maybe in 6 months when you're reevaluating that strategy, you go, hey, actually, that thing we tried, maybe it
Yeah,
would work better now for
right.
whatever reason, right? And so, being open to that possibility as well, because I think we've all been there too, like, we tried that, it didn't work, so we'll
Right.
just never try it again. But again, if you're, moving in an agile way, it allows you to, it allows for the world to change and your marketing to change, which
Right, right. Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, what worked, 2 years before the pandemic, didn't work during, or whatever, So yeah, time is part of that context. And so understanding that you can be biased by context, or what you touched on too, which is so rampant. I think it's the anecdotal of, like, well, we tried that 5 year, like, one of my consulting clients one time, somebody was there for like 12 years or something, knew so much, in a valuable way, knew so much about the organization, but they would come out with these, like, well, yeah, we tried that 8 years ago and it didn't work. Well, okay, but, like, what's changed in the last 8 years that, to your point, might make things different now and maybe worth trying again? So, I guess, to your point, you got to be open to that.
totally. Yeah. I mean, open to all the possibilities. And,
Right,
even more common is that something worked 5 years ago and isn't working anymore. And so
right,
we
right,
just try to do it harder, well,
right,
it used to work, so it must still.
right,
But it's not the case. It's actually my favorite thing about marketing is, like, everything I learned when I was in college studying marketing is just not actually a thing anymore. Like, most of it doesn't exist,
right,
which is fascinating. But what I did learn how to do was measure the effectiveness. I learned about data. I learned about, how to code things, code
right.
experiments and stuff like that. And that actually remains, many, many, many years later, and opens up the possibility. There was no social media, there were no apps, there were no smartphones when I was in college, if that tells you
Right,
how old I am. So,
right. Yeah.
that's like where so much marketing happens today. So if we're just relying on the same old tactics and things like that, we're going to miss out on so many opportunities. And I've been part of so many experiments too, where, we try something and it just totally fails. I mean, to your
Right.
point, you didn't, like, learn, if you learn something, it's not a failure, but just being able to say, hey, there's a new app out there called Clubhouse. We want to do some
Right.
audio.
Yeah, remember that? Yeah.
Remember that, right? Like, it didn't really pan out, but,
Right.
like, anybody who didn't participate on it probably missed out on some really interesting learnings and
Yeah.
an interesting point in time from a marketing perspective, and just being able to uh, jump into it quickly, quickly jump out. If not, the
Yeah.
metaverse, a whole nother thing.
Yeah.
Like, maybe we're not talking about anymore.
Right, right. Yeah, give it 5 or 10 or 20 years or something. But yeah, but I mean, I like your other point about the kind of getting stuck in not only what worked, 8 years ago or didn't work, but that we keep doing things because we believe that they work, but we don't test that they work. And I think that is to kind of take it back to the agile thing too. It's like, reinforcing objectivity by, having that's what I like about having sprints and retrospectives is like, okay, yeah, that ad campaign, it worked really great and it worked great for 6 months, but you know what, last week or last 2 weeks it stopped working. Let's reevaluate what we're doing and maybe not drop everything if it worked for 3 years straight and now it doesn't work for a couple weeks, but like start to rethink things and be objective about this versus, I don't there people are tasked with doing way too much and, way too quickly and whatever. So it's nice to be able to rely on something that feels like it works, but this is marketing, it's not feeling. So like having that objectivity, I think is so important, and having a construct to reinforce that so that you don't feel like you have to keep like every day checking if everything's working. No, we're going to check every couple weeks, or maybe some things check every month, but have a regular time to do that and really give it the time and the focus to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't watch the pot.
Right.
I'm notorious for like staring at the dashboards. Anything,
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little bit of time for sure.
Right.
So for anybody who's listening out there and is like, I want to set this up in my org. I want to pivot to an agile marketing approach. What are the first like 2 or 3 steps that a founder or a marketing leader or a team leader should take to start to implement that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first step is to just become a little more educated about what it is that you're considering signing you and your company up for. So, because I think the first couple things, I mean, having been through this quite a few times and having been brought on board to help teams get acclimated and stuff, there's going to be a lot of questions and there's going to be a lot of apprehension. And that's, for often for really, really good reasons. I mean, nobody loves change. We know that, even if it's good change. So as a leader, I would say, read up on it, read up on good case studies, read up on bad case studies where it didn't go well. Like start to understand a little bit. And then when you've made a decision to move forward with it, don't try to do it all at once. Like try to find iterative way. I mean, we've been talking about iterating all, this entire show. Find a way to iterate, rolling it into an organization. And, in a lot of orgs, if you're in the marketing team, maybe your engineering or IT team is already doing Agile. So look to them, look at how it works and maybe what gets in the way of them being successful, and build some partnerships there. And really, again, just try to be mindful, just like we need to be empathetic and mindful of what our customers go through. Be mindful that any change like this is, for your team members, it's a job on top of their current job. So they're going to be doing normal, what we call waterfall, like old school, marketing planning and all that stuff while they're doing Agile for a little bit. And be mindful of that. Like try not to give them more work on top of all of that as well. Like try to be mindful of that. And then, shameless plug for, I guess, all of us Agile coaches out there. It is helpful to have someone that's been through this before. I do workshops, I do coaching. There's lots of great companies that do that have teams of coaches and training and all that stuff too. Don't just try to go it alone. Like to get some help from someone that can be a little objective and bring some outside views into it as well as you embark.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for anybody listening out there who wants to learn more, make sure you connect with Greg on LinkedIn. How else can people find you?
Yeah, LinkedIn is a great place. I have a website called gregkihlström.com. So my name is, you can see the spelling of my name in the show notes or whatever. And either of those would be great. And I do workshops, I do training, consulting, all that stuff. Happy to reach out. You can reach out to me over LinkedIn. I can also recommend great people by industry and all that stuff too. So always happy to help and even just share some ideas.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Greg. I loved this conversation. And I think it's just a really valuable kind of idea for people to think about. And I think a lot of people are familiar with Agile from a programming or software perspective. And so to apply it to marketing it makes so much sense. So thank you so much for joining today.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to Marketing Demystified wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next time for more conversations that